You know that gut feeling you get when something's off? Yeah, I had that. My wife, Emily, started acting different. She used to be so predictable, you know? She'd spend her evenings on the couch with me, binging crime dramas or scrolling Instagram while pretending to listen to my rants about work. But lately she was distracted, phone always in her hand, texting more than usual, laughing at messages I wasn't privy to. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was work stress, or she was planning a surprise for me. That's what I told myself until things got weirder. It started with her staying late at work. Emily's an event planner, so I bought her excuse about prepping for some big charity gala. But when I offered to bring her dinner one night, she flat out refused. Don't bother, she said. I already ate. That hit me wrong. Emily loved when I showed up with takeout, always said it made her feel special. The real red flag, though, was the perfume. She'd started wearing this heavy floral scent she used to hate. When I asked about it, she just shrugged and said it was a free sample from a client. But then I noticed it lingered on her long after she got home. She wasn't wearing it for me, that much was clear. I told myself I was overthinking. We'd been married for 7 years and things weren't perfect, but they weren't bad either. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't leave. So, like an idiot, I started snooping. I didn't want to, felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust. But then again, wasn't she betraying mine? One night while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My heart was pounding like I was the one doing something wrong. I didn't even need to unlock it. The notifications on the lock screen said it all. A string of texts from Mark, her coworker. I can't stop thinking about last night, one read. We have to be more careful, said another. I sat there, staring at her phone, my hands shaking. I didn't want to believe it, but how could I ignore what was right in front of me? My chest felt like it was caving in, and I had no idea what to do next. When Emily came out of the shower, I pretended nothing was wrong. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to figure out what I was dealing with and how far it had gone. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. After that night, everything felt different. I couldn't look at Emily without hearing those texts in my head. She was so nonchalant, going about her day like nothing was wrong, while I was barely holding it together. I needed answers. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted the full picture before I dropped the bomb. Maybe I was hoping I'd find something to explain it all, a misunderstanding, something innocent. But deep down I already knew. The next day I told her I had to work late. She barely reacted, just nodded and said, "Okay, don't wait up." That hurt more than I expected. I wasn't even sure if she was faking disinterest or if she genuinely didn't care anymore. Either way, it stung. Instead of going to work, I went straight to her office. Emily worked at a sleek downtown firm that screamed, "Successful people only." I sat in my car, watching the building. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I stayed there for over an hour until I saw them. Emily came out, laughing at something Mark had said. He wasn't what I expected. I figured he'd be some suave, good-looking guy, but he wasn't. He looked average, messy hair, cheap suit, nothing special. That almost made it worse. This guy? She was risking everything for him? They didn't do anything obvious, no hand-holding or kissing, but the way they stood close to each other, the way she smiled up at him, it was enough. I felt like I was watching someone else's life, not mine. I decided to follow them. They got into separate cars, which threw me off, but I stuck with Mark. He drove to a nearby cafe, parked, and went inside. A few minutes later, Emily pulled up. She joined him at a corner table, her back to the window. I stayed in my car, my stomach twisting into knots. Watching them laugh and lean in close was like a punch to the gut. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, not because I wanted to keep them but because I needed proof. If she tried to deny it later, I wanted something solid. They stayed for about an hour before leaving separately again. I didn't bother following Emily this time. I already had my answer. That night, I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. She came home, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and went on about her day. I just nodded and grunted in response, too angry and hurt to fake it anymore. When she went to bed, I stayed up, scrolling through the pictures on my phone. I couldn't stop staring at them, wondering how we got here. What was I missing? What did Mark have that I didn't? I knew I couldn't keep quiet much longer. The truth was out there, staring me in the face, and I couldn't live with the lies anymore. The next morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I couldn't take another day of pretending everything was fine. Emily was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was just another day. It almost made me angrier, how calm and normal she was while I felt like my world was falling apart. I sat down across from her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily, we need to talk." She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. "What's up?" she asked, playing it cool. "Too cool." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Who's Mark?" Her expression didn't change at first. She just blinked at me like she hadn't heard the question. "Mark. My coworker," she said, tilting her head like she was confused. "Why?" "I saw the texts," I said flatly. "And I saw you with him yesterday." Her face paled. For a moment, I thought she might actually admit it. But then, just like flipping a switch, she went on the defensive. "You were spying on me? Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe it. She wasn't denying it, she was turning it around on me. "Don't do that," I snapped. "Don't make this about me. I saw the way you were with him. Just tell me the truth, Emily." She sighed and rubbed her temples like I was giving her a headache. "You're being ridiculous. Mark and I are just friends. We work together. That's it." Friends don't send texts like, "I can't stop thinking about last night." My voice cracked at the end and I hated myself for it. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You're taking that out of context. He's been going through a rough time and I've been helping him. That's all." I wanted to believe her, I really did, but the evidence was stacked too high. "So meeting him at a cafe after work is part of helping him too?" Now she looked genuinely flustered. "You followed me?" she asked, her voice rising. "Do you hear yourself right now? You're acting crazy." "I'm not the one sneaking around," I shot back. "You are." For a moment we just stared at each other. Her face hardened, and I knew then she wasn't going to come clean. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said, her tone icy, "but you're blowing this way out of proportion. I can't believe you don't trust me." That hit me harder than I expected. The way she said it, like I was the bad guy for doubting her, made me question myself for half a second. But then I remembered the texts, the pictures, the lies. "You're gaslighting me," I said quietly. "I'm not stupid, Emily." Her jaw clenched and she stood up abruptly. "I can't do this right now," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'm going to work. We'll talk later." And just like that, she was gone. I sat there in the silence, my head spinning. I didn't know how to feel, angry, hurt, betrayed, or just plain stupid. All I knew was that this wasn't over. After Emily left, I sat there for hours, replaying our conversation in my head. Every word, every excuse, it all felt so rehearsed. I couldn't believe how easily she tried to flip the blame on me. But now I was more determined than ever to get the truth. That evening, she came home later than usual. I half expected her to storm in, ready to argue, but instead, she acted like nothing had happened. She walked into the kitchen, set her bag down, and asked, "What do you want for dinner?" The casual tone made my blood boil. "Seriously?" I said. "That's what you're worried about right now?" She sighed like I was exhausting her. "Can we not do this tonight? I've had a long day. A long day with Mark." I shot back. I hated the bitterness in my voice, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. She froze, her back to me. For a second I thought she might finally break, but instead, she turned around with a sharp glare. "You're obsessed," she said. "This is unhealthy." "Unhealthy." I laughed bitterly. "You're lying to my face, sneaking around behind my back, and I'm the one who's unhealthy." She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. "I've told you there's nothing going on. But you're so determined to make me the bad guy, you're seeing things that aren't there." That was it. I pulled out my phone and opened the pictures I'd taken. "This isn't nothing, Emily. Stop lying to me." Her face fell when she saw the photos. For a split second there was panic in her eyes, but then she recovered, her expression hardening. "You really went that far?" she said quietly. "Following me? Taking pictures? Do you even hear how crazy that sounds?" "I don't care how it sounds," I snapped. "I care about the truth. So why don't you start telling it?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side like she was searching for an escape. "Fine," she said finally. "Mark has been going through a rough divorce. He needed someone to talk to and I was there for him. That's it." "That's not what those texts say," I said, my voice shaking. "He can't stop thinking about last night. Be more careful." "What do those mean, Emily?" She rolled her eyes. "God, you're so dramatic. He was thanking me for being there for him." "You're twisting everything." It was like hitting a brick wall. No matter what I said, she had an answer and none of it felt real. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why won't you just tell me the truth?" Her expression softened, just for a moment. "Because there's nothing to tell," she said quietly. "You're making this into something it's not." And then she walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, holding my phone and wondering if I'd ever really known her at all. The next few days were a blur. Emily and I barely spoke, each interaction strained and loaded with tension. She stuck to her story, brushing off my accusations like they were ridiculous, while I kept digging, desperate for the truth. It was like living with a stranger. I decided to take things up a notch. If she wouldn't give me answers, maybe I could find them myself. I called in a favor from my buddy, Ryan. He's the kind of guy who knows how to get information, tech-savvy and always up for some mischief. I explained the situation and he didn't even hesitate. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Once I start, there's no going back." "I need to know," I said. "I can't live like this." Within a day, Ryan had cracked into her deleted messages. What he found made my stomach churn. The texts between Emily and Mark weren't just flirty, they were explicit. Plans for meetups, messages about how much they missed each other, and worst of all, references to times they'd been together. The truth hit me like a freight train. This wasn't some emotional affair. It was physical too. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, reading and rereading the messages until the words blurred together. Every line felt like a dagger. I couldn't believe the woman I'd loved for 7 years, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had done this to me. The next morning, Emily found me in the same spot, still holding my phone. "Did you even come to bed?" she asked, her tone more annoyed than concerned. I looked up at her, the anger bubbling to the surface. "No. I was too busy reading your texts with Mark." Her face went white. For a second she looked like she might deny it again, but then she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "You what?" she whispered. "I know everything," I said, my voice shaking. "The texts, the meetups, all of it." "How long, Emily? How long have you been lying to me?" She sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It just got out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean you got caught? Don't act like this was some accident. You made choices, Emily. Every lie, every text, every time you were with him, you chose this." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a hollow, burning anger. "It didn't mean anything," she said through her sobs. "I swear it wasn't about you. I was just... I don't know, I felt lost and Mark..." "Don't you dare blame this on feeling lost," I cut in. "You had me. I was right here, willing to do anything for you, and you threw it all away for him." "Why, Emily? Why him?" She didn't answer, just buried her face in her hands. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, standing up. "You killed us, Emily. And for what? Some fling with a guy who doesn't even respect you enough to keep it discreet." She looked up at me, her face twisted with guilt. "Please," she said. "We can work through this. I'll cut him off. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." But it was too late. I shook my head, my voice cold. "You can't fix this. we're done. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her to deal with the mess she'd made. After our confrontation, the house felt suffocating. Every corner, every piece of furniture, it all reminded me of Emily. Of us. Of what used to be. I couldn't stand to be there anymore. I packed a bag and left that same evening. I didn't tell Emily where I was going. I didn't need to. As far as I was concerned, she'd lost the right to know anything about my life. I ended up at Ryan's place. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question. "Guest room's yours," he said, handing me a beer. "Take all the time you need." Ryan wasn't the type to pry, which I appreciated. He didn't need details to know I was in pieces. I spent the first night sitting in silence, staring at the TV without registering a single thing. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from Emily, but I ignored them. The next morning she called. I let it ring. Then she left a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, full of desperation. "Please, we need to talk." "I need to explain." I deleted it before she could finish. For the next few days I avoided her like the plague. I didn't go home, didn't check my texts, didn't even think about what I'd left behind. Ryan kept me company, keeping things light, acting like everything was normal. It helped in a weird way. But then one evening I got a call from her sister, Megan. She and I had always gotten along. She was one of the few people in Emily's life I genuinely liked. "Hey," she said, her voice hesitant. "Emily's worried about you. She says you've been ignoring her." "She's right," I said flatly. Megan sighed. "Look, I'm not calling to defend her. What she did was awful. But can I just ask, what are you planning to do? Are you coming back? Are you guys done?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on escaping that I hadn't thought about the future. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't just pretend everything's fine. She broke us, Megan. I don't know if there's anything left to save." "I get it," she said softly. "Just don't let her spiral, okay? She's a mess right now." For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. Despite everything, I didn't want Emily to spiral. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, and the look on her face when I caught her. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. "I can't help her," I said. "She made her choices. Now she has to live with them." Megan didn't push. "Fair enough," she said. "Just take care of yourself, okay? Don't let this eat you alive." We hung up, and I felt the weight of her words settle over me. I couldn't let this consume me, but how was I supposed to move on when everything felt so raw? That night I decided to make it official. I texted Emily, "I'm filing for divorce. Please don't contact me unless it's about paperwork." It was a short message, but it felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever sent. A few minutes later she replied, "I'll sign whatever you need. I'm so sorry for everything." For the first time in days I felt a sliver of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Filing for divorce felt surreal. I'd always thought Emily and I were unshakable, like no matter what life threw at us we'd figure it out. But now I was sitting in a lawyer's office, explaining the situation to a man who barely looked up from his notepad. "Do you want to file under irreconcilable differences or cite infidelity?" he asked, flipping through some papers. I hesitated. I wasn't looking to punish Emily, but the word infidelity felt like the truth I couldn't ignore. "Infidelity," I said finally. It felt like a final blow, even though I knew we were already over. The lawyer nodded like it was just another Tuesday for him. For me, it was the official start of the end. That night, I returned to the house to grab more of my things. I'd been avoiding it, but I couldn't put it off forever. Emily wasn't home, which was a relief. I didn't want another confrontation. The quiet was almost eerie as I moved through the place, packing my clothes, some keepsakes, and a few essentials. Then I saw it, a picture of us on the shelf in the living room. It was from our honeymoon, both of us grinning like idiots on a beach in Maui. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. How had we gone from that to this? I almost left it behind, but something made me throw it in the box. Maybe I wasn't ready to let go completely, or maybe I just wanted to remember that there had been good times too. Before I left, I noticed something on the counter, a handwritten note. It was from Emily. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you can find it someday. I'll sign the papers. I'm so sorry. Emily. Her handwriting was shaky, the words smudged in places like she'd been crying while writing it. I crumpled it up and stuffed it in my pocket. I didn't want to feel anything for her anymore, but that note hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. Back at Ryan's, I told him about the note. You gonna let it sway you? He asked, handing me a beer. No, I said firmly. She's just trying to make herself feel better. This isn't about her anymore. Ryan raised his bottle in a mock toast. That's the spirit. Keep that energy. But as much as I wanted to be done with her, part of me still felt the pull. 7 years of memories don't just vanish overnight. I'd lost my wife, my partner, and my sense of stability all at once. The road ahead felt long, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. The days blurred together after filing for divorce. I threw myself into work, hoping it would distract me from the constant replay of Emily's betrayal in my head. It worked sometimes, but nights were the hardest. The quiet, the emptiness, it all gave too much space for my thoughts to creep in. Emily didn't reach out again after her note, and I stuck to my decision not to contact her unless it was about the divorce. Still, reminders of her were everywhere. Little things like a favorite mug she always used or a song that used to make her dance around the kitchen hit me out of nowhere. One evening I got a call from Megan. Hey, she started, her voice cautious. I know you said you're done with Emily, but I thought you should know something. My stomach tightened. What is it? She's not doing great, Megan said. She's been staying at mom and dad's and they're worried about her. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She's just broken. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, like good, she should hurt after what she did. But another part of me, the part that still cared, felt a pang of guilt. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. But I can't fix her, Megan. She made her choices. I get that, Megan said. But if there's any part of you that still cares, maybe just check in? I'm not saying forgive her. Just let her know you don't hate her. The call stuck with me long after we hung up. I told myself I wasn't responsible for Emily's pain, but it was hard to shake the image of her falling apart. For years I'd been the one to comfort her, to lift her up when things got tough. Turning my back on her now felt unnatural, even if she deserved it. A few days later, I got another unexpected reminder of Emily. I ran into one of her co-workers at the grocery store, a woman named Claire I'd met a handful of times at company events. She spotted me in the cereal aisle and hesitated before walking over. Hey, she said, giving me a small, awkward smile. How are you holding up? I blinked, caught off guard. I'm managing. Thanks. She nodded, then lowered her voice. I just want you to know, not everyone at the office was okay with what happened. A lot of us were shocked when we found out. When you found out what? I asked, my heart sinking. Claire looked around like she was checking if anyone else could hear. About Emily and Mark. People started noticing months ago, but no one wanted to say anything. I'm sorry you had to find out the way you did. It was like getting punched in the gut all over again. Months? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded, her face full of sympathy. I just thought you should know. You didn't deserve any of this. I thanked her and left the store, my mind racing. Hearing it from someone outside my circle made it all feel more real, more permanent. This wasn't just a bad dream I could wake up from, it was my reality. That night, I stared at the crumpled note Emily had left, still stuffed in my pocket. I didn't know why I hadn't thrown it away yet. Maybe some part of me wasn't ready to let go completely. But after what Claire told me, I knew there was no going back. I smoothed out the paper, read it one last time, then tore it into tiny pieces and tossed it in the trash. It was time to stop looking back and start figuring out how to move forward. After hearing Claire's confirmation of Emily's affair, something shifted in me. The lingering hope, the what-ifs, the memories that had been keeping me tethered to her, they all started to lose their grip. It was like I finally accepted that the person I thought I knew no longer existed. I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. Ryan convinced me to hit the gym with him, and I threw myself into it. At first it was just a way to kill time, but eventually it became a routine I looked forward to. There was something cathartic about sweating out all the anger and frustration. I also reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. It was awkward at first, trying to explain the situation without turning it into a pity party, but they were supportive. One night my buddy Adam said something that stuck with me. "Man, you gave her everything. That's on her, not you. Don't let her mess up the rest of your life." It hit me then how much I'd let Emily's actions dictate my emotions. I'd been walking around with this storm of anger, sadness, and confusion, letting it control me. But Adam was right. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of her betrayal. Around this time, the divorce process started to pick up. My lawyer had sent over the paperwork, and Emily had signed it without contest. It was a relief not to have to fight over assets or drag things out, but seeing her signature on those papers made it all feel final in a way I wasn't ready for. One day, I got a text from Megan. "Megan, hey, just wanted you to know Emily moved out of mom and dad's. She's renting a place in town. She's still not doing great, but she's trying." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Thanks for letting me know. I hope she finds her way. I meant it. I didn't wish her ill, I just didn't want her in my life anymore. A few days later I bumped into Megan at a coffee shop. She gave me a small smile and asked if I had a minute to chat. I agreed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. "She asked me to tell you something," Megan said, stirring her latte. "She wants you to know she's sorry for everything. She knows it's too late to fix things, but she wanted you to hear that." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I appreciate you telling me," I said finally. Megan hesitated, then added, "I think she's really trying to be a better person. But she knows she messed up too badly to come back from this." Hearing that brought an odd sense of closure. It didn't erase the pain, but it felt like a final chapter was being written. I didn't need Emily to apologize directly. I'd already decided to let her go, but knowing she was taking accountability, even in a small way, helped me take another step forward. As I left the coffee shop that day, I realized something. I wasn't walking around with that heavy weight on my chest anymore. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close to peace. Weeks turned into months and life slowly started to feel manageable. I wouldn't say I was happy yet, but I wasn't waking up every morning with that crushing weight in my chest either. The anger and sadness that had consumed me after Emily's betrayal were fading, replaced by something quieter, acceptance. I moved into a new apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No shared memories lurking in every corner, no reminders of what used to be. Just a clean slate. Setting it up felt oddly therapeutic, choosing furniture, hanging up art, making it feel like home. Ryan and Adam helped me move in, and we celebrated the first night with pizza and beers on the floor. "Here's to new beginnings," Ryan said, raising his bottle. I clinked mine against his, actually feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into every project, staying late, volunteering for extra tasks, anything to keep my mind busy. My boss noticed and gave me more responsibility, which turned into a promotion a few months later. It wasn't just a title change, it felt like proof that I could rebuild, that my life wasn't stuck in ruins. Socially, I started saying yes more, yes to happy hours, yes to weekend trips, yes to meeting new people. At first, it was just a way to get out of my head, but over time, I realized I was actually enjoying myself. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on anymore, I was just Mike trying to figure things out like everyone else. One night, Ryan convinced me to join him at a friend's party. I wasn't in the mood, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to get back out there," he said, handing me a beer when we arrived. I didn't expect much, but then I met her. Lisa. She wasn't flashy or overly outgoing, just easy to talk to. We ended up sitting on the porch for most of the night, talking about everything from favorite books to bad childhood haircuts. She had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room, like she genuinely cared about what you had to say. I didn't tell her about Emily or the divorce that night, it felt too soon, but when I mentioned I'd been through a rough year, she didn't push for details. Sounds like you're handling it as best you can, she said, giving me a small smile that felt like a warm hug. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying all of this alone. Meeting Lisa was like catching my breath after being underwater for too long. I wasn't looking for anything serious. Hell, I wasn't even sure I was ready to date again, but there was something about her that felt safe. Natural. After the party, we started texting. At first, it was casual, just exchanging book recommendations or sending funny memes, but soon, our conversations stretched into late nights. I found myself looking forward to her messages, the way she'd turn even the most mundane topics into something interesting. One Saturday, she suggested we grab coffee. I almost said no. The idea of putting myself out there, of risking more heartbreak, made my chest tighten. But Ryan, ever the meddler, practically shoved me out the door. "You deserve this," he said. "Just go and see where it leads." Lisa was waiting at a small cafe downtown when I arrived. She waved me over, her smile warm and genuine. "Glad you made it," she said, standing to give me a quick hug. The conversation flowed as easily in person as it had over text. She told me about her job as a graphic designer, her rescue dog Max, and her love of hiking. I told her about my promotion, my awkward attempts at decorating my new place, and hesitantly my love-hate relationship with cooking. "Maybe I'll have to give you a few lessons," she teased. "Can't have you surviving on takeout forever." By the end of the afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. She didn't press for details about my past, didn't treat me like some broken thing that needed fixing. She just listened. It was refreshing. We started seeing each other more after that. It wasn't some whirlwind romance, there were no grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but it was steady and comforting. Lisa had a way of making me feel like I could take things at my own pace, like she wasn't in any rush to force something I wasn't ready for. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I found myself at her place. She'd made pasta and opened a bottle of wine. "It's nothing fancy," she said, setting the plates on the table. "But I figured carbs and alcohol are universal cures for bad days." We ended up on her couch, watching some ridiculous rom-com and laughing at how over the top it was. At one point she turned to me, her expression soft. "You're really easy to be around, you know that?" Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to hearing things like that anymore. "You're not so bad yourself," I joked, but there was a lump in my throat. For the first time in a long time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could let someone in again. Being with Lisa felt different from anything I'd ever experienced. There was no pressure, no need to pretend I was completely okay. She didn't ask for the polished version of me, I could just be myself, messy and all. But even with how comfortable things were, I still hadn't told her about Emily. I wasn't sure how to bring it up or if I even needed to. Part of me was afraid it would change the way she saw me. What if she thought I was too damaged, or worse, that I was still hung up on my ex? One evening, after a quiet dinner at her place, Lisa asked about the box of books I'd been meaning to bring over. "Are you a serial collector or just attached to your old stuff?" she teased. "Maybe a little of both," I admitted. "I guess I'm not great at letting go of things." She smiled, but there was curiosity in her eyes. "You ever feel like you're holding on to more than just things?" It was such a simple question, but it hit harder than I expected. I knew she wasn't trying to pry, but it was the opening I needed. I took a deep breath and leaned back against the couch. "There's something I haven't told you," I said, my voice quieter than usual. Her smile softened. "Okay. Take your time." So I told her. Not everything at once, I didn't think I could, but enough for her to understand. I told her about Emily, about the affair, about how blindsided I'd been. I told her about the divorce, about how I'd been living in a fog for months, and about how meeting her had been the first good thing to happen in a long time. Lisa didn't interrupt. She didn't try to offer solutions or say the usual platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. She just listened, her eyes locked on mine, her expression full of quiet understanding. When I finally finished, she reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said softly. "No one deserves to feel that kind of betrayal." Her words were simple, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. I felt a lump rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Thanks," I managed. She squeezed my hand, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not broken, Mike. You're healing. And I'm really glad I met you." That was it. No pressure, no expectations, just her letting me know she was there. In that moment I realized how much lighter I felt, like I wasn't carrying the weight of it all alone anymore. Opening up to Lisa felt like a turning point. For the first time in months, I wasn't bottling everything up or replaying the same painful memories over and over. I didn't have to carry the burden of my past alone anymore. Still, there was one last thing I needed to do before I could fully move on. I needed to face Emily one final time. The divorce was almost finalized, and while we'd handled most of it through lawyers, there were still a few loose ends to tie up. Emily had reached out, asking if we could meet to discuss some lingering details about selling the house. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but deep down, I knew this meeting wasn't just about paperwork. It was about closure. We agreed to meet at a neutral place, a quiet park we used to go to when we were first dating. I got there early, sitting on a bench and watching the sun dip behind the trees. It felt strange to be back, like I was looking at a snapshot of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. When Emily arrived, she looked different. Tired. Smaller, somehow. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down next to me. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. For a while we just sat there, the silence stretching between us. Finally she spoke. "I just want to say, I'm sorry, Mike. For everything." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the weight of her regret. But instead of feeling angry or resentful, I just felt tired. "I know," I said. "But sorry doesn't undo what happened." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know that. I wish I could take it all back." We talked for a while after that, about the house, the logistics of splitting our remaining things, and a little about what had gone wrong between us. She admitted that she'd been selfish and insecure, that she'd let her own issues destroy what we had. I didn't argue or try to make her feel worse. I'd already spent enough energy on anger. When the conversation wound down, she looked at me, her expression hopeful but cautious. "Do you think we'll ever be able to be friends someday?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I don't think so, Emily. I don't hate you, but I can't go back. I need to move forward." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." As I stood to leave, she reached out and touched my arm. "I'm glad you were in my life, Mike. Even if I ruined it." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave her a small nod before walking away. It felt like closing the door on a chapter of my life that had been open far too long. That night, I told Lisa about the meeting. She didn't press for details, just listened and let me talk it out. "How do you feel now?" she asked when I finished. I thought about it for a moment. "Lighter," I said. "Like I can finally breathe again." And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't just something I said to convince myself. I actually meant it. After meeting Emily, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I wasn't carrying around the bitterness or anger anymore. It didn't mean I forgot what happened. Those scars would always be there, but I no longer felt defined by them. With that chapter closed, I found myself leaning more into my relationship with Lisa. It wasn't something I had planned or expected, but the more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I enjoyed just being around her. There was no drama, no mind games, just a quiet, steady connection that felt right. One weekend, Lisa invited me to join her and some friends on a hiking trip. Normally I would have made an excuse. Hiking wasn't really my thing, but something about the way her face lit up when she asked made it impossible to say no. The hike was tougher than I expected. By the time we reached the summit, I was out of breath and sore, but the view made it all worth it. Lisa stood beside me, her eyes wide with awe. "Isn't this amazing?" she said, her voice full of wonder. I nodded, though I was more focused on her than the view. She caught me staring and grinned. "What?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "I'm just glad I came." Later that evening, as we sat around a campfire with her friends, I realized how much my life had changed in the past few months. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. I had people around me who cared, a job I was thriving in, and someone by my side who made me feel like I could take on the world. One night, back at her place, Lisa brought up something I hadn't been ready to think about before. "Have you thought about what you want for the future?" she asked, tracing patterns on my arm as we lay on the couch. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The future had felt like such a fragile thing since my marriage fell apart, like making plans would only set me up for disappointment. But with Lisa, it didn't feel so scary. "I think I just want to keep moving forward," I said finally. "One step at a time." She smiled, her eyes warm. "I can work with that." Her words stuck with me. For the first time, the future didn't feel like an overwhelming question mark. It felt like a blank page, ready for me to write a new story. A year ago I thought my life was over. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it all felt like too much to bear. But now, sitting on the balcony of my new apartment with Lisa curled up beside me and the sun setting over the city, I realized something. I survived. Not just that, I was happy again. The divorce was finalized a month ago, a clean break that marked the official end of my marriage. There was no celebration, no moment of triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement that it was finally over. Emily sent me one last message after the papers were signed. "I'm glad you're moving on. I hope you find the happiness I couldn't give you." I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. I wished her well in my heart, then let her go completely. Now my days are filled with new routines, new people and new dreams. Lisa and I have grown closer, but we're taking things slow. She understands that I'm still healing, and she's never once pushed me to move faster than I'm ready for. One weekend we decided to tackle cooking together. She brought over her favorite recipes, and we spent the afternoon making a mess of my kitchen. Flour dusted the counters, a pan of lasagna bubbled in the oven, and Lisa laughed as I tried and failed to master her technique for rolling dough. "You're hopeless," she teased, wiping a streak of sauce off my cheek. "Maybe," I said, grinning. "But I'm trying." That's how life feels now. I'm trying. I'm learning to let go of the past, to embrace the good things in front of me, and to trust that even when things fall apart, there's always a chance to rebuild. As Lisa and I sat down to eat that night, I looked across the table at her and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. It wasn't the kind of dramatic, all-consuming love I once thought was the goal. It was quieter, steadier, and somehow even better. The past still lingers in the background sometimes, like a scar that's faded but never completely gone. But it doesn't define me anymore. It's just a part of the story that brought me here. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where the next chapter takes me.